Hello friends, my name is Marinas and today I have reviews for you of 3 books written by Dominican authors. I didn't really do this on purpose, like I didn't choose 3 books to then make this video. I read one of these books in April, one in June, and one in July. And I loved all 3 of them, so I figured that this was a good way to kind of talk to you guys about these 3 amazing books that I really enjoyed. For those of you that don't know, I am Dominican American. I was born in the US, but my parents immigrated here separately, both of them when they were in their teens. My father is from Santiago and my mother is from Santo Domingo, and they met in New York. I've been to the DR a couple of times, one when I was younger to stay in the barrio and to visit my mom's family and all of that in Santo Domingo, and then in my adult years, we tend to stay at like the resorts and the beaches and stuff on the north side and on the east side of the island. Growing up, I can't even tell you what the first book that I read by a Dominican author was, but I am confident that it was in my adulthood. Part of that is certainly lack of representation, but the other part was me and being kind of content in my very narrow reading and not realizing the benefits of reading diversely and like seeking the things that represented me better. That all said, let's get into it. The first book is Ghost Squad by Claribel Ortega. I found Claribel originally on Twitter, and that's how I heard about her and this book that she was working on. She's been to BookNet Fest and she was wonderful on panels, and I just always felt like I was going to love this book. It's a book about a girl, a little Dominican girl named Lucely. She can see the spirits of her family members who have passed, but one day accidentally she uses a spell that wakes up malicious spirits and they start wreaking havoc in St. Augustine. So it's set in Florida as well. And so Lucely has to team up with her best friend, because there's a best friendship at the heart of this as well, and they team up with Sid's grandmother, who is a witch, to figure out everything that's going on and set it to rights. This is a middle grade novel, which is the only thing that I can really say about why you may not like this book. It very much has the pacing and the humor and the atmosphere of a middle grade novel, and if you don't enjoy those things, you might come here and be like, this is a middle grade novel, which it is. Personally, this was just what the doctor ordered for me, especially when I read it back in April. I was having a really hard time getting into books, but I picked this up and I literally read it in a day. It was a whole romp. It was easy to read. It made me feel, it made me laugh, it made me cry, and I was always interested in the mystery aspect of it as well. Like, I wanted to know what was happening in St. Augustine. It's very rare, I think, that comp titles really land or like hit the nail on the head for the book that it's describing, but Coco Meets Stranger Things with a dash of Ghostbusters is like exactly this. Something about reading it, it was so atmospheric, and it wasn't just the St. Augustine portion of it, but the whole adventure part of it felt nostalgic. Like, it really did feel like Stranger Things or The Goonies, and that image you get of like these kids on their bikes, you know, solving something or trying to fix something. That atmosphere was beautiful, well done, 100% present in this book. Of course, if you know me, you know that I absolutely love books that explore grief, and I think that that was probably one of my favorite things about this book. So it's really interesting because she sets up this sort of like duality of, for Lucely, her family is never really gone. They become spirits and she can still talk to them and she can still engage with them. But her mother leaves her and her father, and so her mother is absent and she's grieving that absence. So the fact that it isn't necessarily a death, but it is a hole that she's never really experienced before because her family is around forever. Love that. I love the way that she talked about suddenly thinking about that grief, but also the hole that created in her day-to-day life. I really appreciated the ghosts and the fireflies of her family. I think that more than just being like Dominican lore, that it was a good way to show us Dominican culture. Like, a lot of these characters not only felt like people I could know, but they felt like personifications of some of this culture. And just the very idea of the way that you carry that with you, your family, your culture, like that stuff is in your bones. Or in this case, it's in your backyard as a tree full of fireflies or whatnot. beautifully done. The last thing that I will gush about here is that whenever you're reading young adult or middle grade fiction, to me, I mean, this is what happened to me as I got older. I never thought about this, but as I get older, I'm always like, but where are the adults? Like, where are the parents? Like, why are they getting away with this? And this book did such a great job of addressing that. The parents were present, but our kids were like smart and sneaky enough to sneak around and have their adventures. And when it came time for help, they went to adults and got help, and the adults believed them and helped them. It was such a great dynamic between the kids and the adults in this story, which is what I love to see. I think sometimes it can be very lazy to just get the adults out of the way with a reason that doesn't feel real. Here, when the adults weren't around, it felt real, and when we needed them, they were around. Perfect for anybody who has young readers, perfect for anybody who is in a reading slump and wants something that they can get through really quickly. This is just so fast-paced and so full of adventure that I feel like you'll do like I did and get in there and just breeze right through it. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. Elizabeth Acevedo has become one of my favorite authors of all time. I've definitely read her 2 other books, The Poet X and With the Fire on High, and I finally got around to reading this one. It took me a little bit after it was released, not because I didn't want to read it immediately, but I just knew, I know that when I read Elizabeth Acevedo books, like, it gets me. You know, talking about not reading books by Dominican authors or that had Dominican girls in them or whatnot, these are books that every time I read them, I just think about how much it would have meant to me to have read them when I was a teenager. This is a story told in verse about 2 girls. Camino lives in the Dominican Republic and Yahaira lives in New York City. They both get the news that their father has died on a plane crash, and because of this loss, they figure out that they are sisters and they didn't know about each other because their father had one family in New York and one family in the DR. Because this is a story told in verse, it's told with a lot of economy. We get a really good look at both of the girls' lives, and so it touches on a lot of different things. It touches on topics of poverty and of loss and of grief, of course, split families, adultery, the complications of immigration. Like, there are a lot of things that this story brings up, but it doesn't necessarily do a deep dive of them. I wouldn't necessarily expect this book to teach you about these things, but it does capture them really well, and it paints this beautiful picture of life and their loss, and you really just get the snapshot of them receiving the news, dealing with their grief, finding out about each other, and then learning about each other. Acevedo is a wonderful writer, and the thing that gets me about her stories is that, one, she captures things that I never really see in fiction. She opens this one describing the muddy season, the rainy season in the Dominican Republic, but then uses that imagery to talk about the way that place and culture makes marks. This story of a man that had a family in New York and a family in DR is probably not as uncommon as people think. It's something that I feel like I grew up hearing about, or there were stories about of women that this happened to. And so Camina and Yahaira's story is really about processing how one person could be a good father but a bad husband, or, you know, do good and bad things. I just think that there's a sort of exploration of like the machismo that sometimes comes with Caribbean and Latin American cultures, and this then takes that idea but then puts a bunch of women at the heart of it, processing this and then healing from this. The second thing that I love about her stories is that they have these clean, happy endings, and I love that she's giving us this representation of young Afro-Latina girls who do get their happy ending. This was also an exploration of grief and it did that very well as well. I think the one thing that really stood out to me about the way that she navigated that was this idea that sometimes you know something in your head, like you know what it should be or what you should be feeling, but that doesn't necessarily take away from the fact of what you feel. And a lot of times these girls like knew something about their father or had a memory of their father, but that didn't really take away what they felt in this situation. Overall, another stunning work by Elizabeth Acevedo, who definitely deserves all of the praise and recognition that she gets for writing these absolutely beautiful stories. Finally, I have Afterlife by Julia Alvarez. I've never read any books by Julia Alvarez, which is kind of a shame for a Dominican person. I think I own How the Garcia Girls Lost Their Accent, or my sister has it. We owned it at one point in our library. This is Alvarez's first book after I think 14 years. There's been a gap between the books that she published, and I got the opportunity to listen to this. I listened to it as an audiobook through Libro FM. Libro FM, for those that you don't know, is an audiobook service, but a portion of the proceeds go to independent bookstores, which is really great, especially for people like me who are struggling to divest from Amazon services. So I've been using Libro FM instead, and they reached out to me, which was really great. Afterlife was one of the June books I believe that I could have chosen in order to listen to for free. So thank you again to Libro FM for the opportunity. I'll leave a link down to the website because it really is a cool service and a good way to give back to independent bookstores and not to big bad companies. Afterlife is a story of a woman named Antonia who has recently retired from her job as a professor, but also has lost her husband of many years. So she's dealing with the grief of that, and two things kind of happen. One is that her next door neighbor is hiring undocumented workers, and one of them comes over to help her, but then also asks for something in return. So she gets kind of involved in his whole story of trying to bring his girlfriend up from Mexico. The other part is that she is one of 4 sisters, and one of her sisters goes missing, and so they're trying to figure out what has happened to her and what they can do to help her. I would say there's plenty that happens in this, but it is a very quiet plot because the highlight of this is just how absolutely wonderful Alvarez is at stringing together these ideas and feelings and sentences and words, and the way that she plays with language both in English and in Spanish. Not that there is a lot of Spanish in this, but Antonia thinks a lot about, she was an English professor, so she thinks a lot about language and the way that people pass between 2 languages and the way that certain things don't quite translate and things of that nature. And all of it was just so graceful. The writing was so beautiful. It was so soft almost. I don't know if that makes sense. And that's definitely the feeling that I got. Is such a quiet and soft story. I swear I didn't notice when I thought about making this video, but this is also an exploration of grief, and one that it is very heavy, but it isn't dark. And it feels very exploratory in the sense that Antonia is going through it and kind of thinking about it as she's doing it. Like, she's thinking about how she's experiencing her grief. I really appreciated the way that it tackled this, and in the way that she starts to think about how her significant other, her husband Sam, has affected her life, and she starts thinking about what would Sam say in the situation that would balance what I would do. She doesn't have that presence anymore, so she really starts to accept that he will live on in those thoughts of hers, in the way that she considers how she goes through her life without him there, but what he would do if he were. I love what that ultimately says about how people live on and how we carry them with us. Another big theme of this is where you draw the line between self-care and caring for others, and that answer was different for what Antonia thought, but also her husband probably thought differently. So she's also questioning, what would Sam do, or how would he handle the situation, about this idea of when do you take care of others and when do you take care of yourself? And when those two things overlap, how do you make decisions about, you know, what you're going to do in any given situation? The only quibble that I have that made this a 4.5 instead of a 5-star read for me was that the sisters have these huge personalities, and I don't think they had enough room within the story to really feel like fleshed out characters. I enjoyed a lot of the interactions between the sisters. I would have liked to see more of that, and I would have liked to feel or been able to really differentiate between the sisters. This audiobook was narrated by Alma Cuervo, and it was absolutely beautiful as well. So I highly recommend, if you just kind of want to listen to a very feelsy and beautifully written book about grief, this is the one for you. That's it for me today. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, let's chat down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.